Adultery is one of the most difficult things that any couple would ever have to go through. So what does the Bible say about adultery and divorce?
Right? Let's get into that.
Hey everybody, I'm Nathan Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock.
And this is Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast. This is a show that we put on every Monday where we take a look at what does the Bible say about marriage? What does it say about about frogs in my throat? What does it say about God's design for marriage? And how can we live that out in our marriages? One of the hardest things that Andrea and I have the opportunity to walk through with couples is the situation where someone within the marriage has had an affair. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the question comes up amongst Christian couples, my spouse has had an affair. Does this mean that I should get a divorce, can get a divorce? What does the Bible say about adultery when it comes to divorce?
Yep.
Before we really take a look at that, and we are going to dig in the Bible and take a look at it, but I wanted to address first someone who might have just come across this channel and you have very recently found out that your spouse has had an affair, and maybe you're here on YouTube searching for information to just help understand how to process this. So before we get into the meat of our discussion on what the Bible says about divorce, we wanted to just take a moment and talk to you directly. And first of all, offer condolences if you're in that situation, because the betrayal of adultery is one of the most difficult things for human beings to process, for any one of us to figure out why it happened, how did it happen, how do I get it to stop happening, what do I do now? Just really the betrayal really of that marital bed is such a devastating thing. And so if you're in a situation where you're finding this video because you've recently found out about an affair, I'm sorry that that's happened. I hope that you find some comfort in knowing that there are a lot of people that have gone through this, and there is biblical guidance on this, and there is, God is God, and He's here with you and for you even through this. And Andrea has experience, because I had an affair almost not quite 10 years ago, and so I wanted Andrea, babe, maybe you to share a little bit for someone who's in that position of what your grieving steps looked like when you found out about that, and kind of how you walked through figuring out, okay, does this mean I leave him or kick him out, or what do I do?
Yeah, that that time of figuring out what has happened and uncovering. I think with any affair, there's so much uncovering that happens, and usually it's in layers, and it's just a constant barrage of betrayal and all that goes along with that. And so that's really hard to deal with, of course. And then on top of that, you're dealing with this it's your spouse, the person that's supposed to be closest to you here on earth, that's done this to you, and all the feelings that come with that, and then the massive amounts of self-doubt and all that. So there's so much emotionally, of course, that's going on, and it's really overwhelming. It's really hard to even live life. I remember feeling like I can't even breathe. Like if it weren't for the Lord putting breath in my lungs, I wouldn't be able to take another breath because I felt so crushed by life. And it was hard to go, at that point we had a nearly 2-year-old son, and it was really hard to just manage the simple tasks of taking care of myself and taking care of my son and going, to work. And I don't think I was very effective at work for a while. But it was hard to just be an adult. So, that time is overwhelming. And then of course there's so many emotions going on and so many thoughts and so many, what do I do now? And I think the best thing to do is realize that nothing needs to be done right away. So there's no need to be in a hurry for anything. And I'm so thankful that the Lord gave me that revelation when I was in that place of, I don't need to make any decisions anytime. I mean, it's hard for me to make the decision of what do I wear today because my brain and my heart is so overloaded with everything else. It was hard to, do anything, but I'm so grateful that I just had that revelation from the Lord that I don't need to hurry up and do anything. And I think that's a lie from Satan, that we need to hurry up and act or react to what's going on, because then you're going to react on emotion, and emotion oftentimes betrays the truth, and emotion oftentimes takes you down roads that you regret. I mean, you see that in your arguments with your spouse, and you see that in so many cases of things that we do based off emotion that then we regret later or think, gosh, I could have done that better or whatever. So that's the one thing I would say is, don't feel like you have to hurry up and do anything. Don't be pressured for that. And be willing to kind of just take a step back from life for a little bit. Maybe you need to take a step back from people and just be with the Lord. I did a lot of that, and that was a safe place for me because I wanted to hear him speaking to me and not the world and the world's views on things. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's not, I'm sure that if you stumble upon this and this is your situation, you feel anything but calm. But just know that you can just pause everything for right now and not be in a hurry to make any decisions and be with the Lord. Allow him to speak to you and ask him to guard your heart.
What advice would you give with regards to who you tell what's going on?
Don't tell people. So that's the struggle with, what's going on is, of course, you want support. And your natural reaction is like, I want to blast this person. For me, it was my husband. I want to blast my husband because look what he's done to me, and I want people to be against him, just like I feel like I'm against him right now, and be on my side, or this is a huge thing, and that he's betrayed me, and I kind of want to betray him. So, but I would strongly advise against that for so many reasons, but be careful who you're telling. And I'm even talking about maybe your family shouldn't know right up front. The way in which you act and react is, of course, going to be a lot based on emotion. But I would suggest to try really hard to not be driven by emotion and think about, okay, if I tell my family, first, do I want to hear what they have to say? Do I even want I'm living so much drama right now anyway. Do I want more drama? Because there's going to be drama. There's going to be people who are oddly fueled by this and kind of like the drama. There's going to be people who are constantly checking in on you, and they of course are wonderful and have great intentions and constantly want to know the story and the updates and the blah 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 blah. Do you want to relive that all the time? Do you want to feel like you have to have other people involved in that? And what if you end up getting back together? Which I know that at this point you're thinking, no. But hear me out. What if you end up getting back together and then the, quote, whole world knows what's happened, and then you have to kind of walk that back? And that's tough. And I'm telling you that from being on the other side. So, think about those things. And if we are all capable of the worst sin, I'm capable of the worst sin. Nathan is capable of the worst sin, and it could have been me having the affair. Would I want Nathan blasting that out to everybody he knows? No, of course I deserve that, but would I want that? Would that make me, would that encourage me to want to work things out with him? Probably not. Would that encourage me, even if things don't work out with him, would that encourage me to want to be civil towards him? No. So I would just really encourage you to be careful about who you're telling. Be careful about who you allow to speak into your life. I told very few people, and even that I feel like I told too many. But I would try to be really careful about who knew, because I wanted people who I knew were champions for marriage and could give biblical advice to know.
That's good.
And who could help support me in a really hard time.
Thanks. Yeah, if that's you and you're listening to this and you're in that situation, please be encouraged that God is for you as a person. He's for your marriage. He's for your family.
Even if you're not for it, and that's okay.
Right.
If you're not for it in the moment, that's okay.
Right. And he's even for your spouse.
Yep.
It grieves him. He is as betrayed right now in this situation as you are. And if you look at a lot of the Old Testament and the prophets that talk about idolatry and sin, they talk about it as adultery against the Lord. Right. So, you have that. You can meet with the Lord on common footing there, and talk to him about that, and he understands.
Yep.
So
I can't remember if you asked or not, or if this is something that we talked about before we started, but so something about was my first thought I finally get to get rid of you,
right?
Sort of thing. Nathan and I had a lot of problems before I found out about this sexual affair that he was having, and I had thought for several years, probably, well, if he would have an affair, then I could leave him. I loved him, but our marriage was not great, and not that I wanted him to have an affair, but I just thought, well, at least if that happened, I'd have an out. So the thought had crossed my mind that could happen in our marriage. But once it happened, the Lord completely changed my heart. I mean, in an instant. I remember the instant where that switch was flipped and I wanted to fight for my marriage. So
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So please be encouraged. We're going to transition to talking about what the Bible says about divorce. So please encourage you to listen along with an open heart and an open mind. And if you're watching this and you're not in that position, man, please really listen carefully to this and open up your Bible alongside of us and have a look, because in all likelihood you either do know someone or will know someone in your lifetime that's going through this. It's an absolute epidemic amongst marriage, of people that don't work hard for their marriage, and as they grow apart, things like affairs become a more and more of a possibility and ultimately a reality.
Yeah, it might be good at some point to do an episode about how to support a betrayed a friend.
How to be a friend.
How to be a friend to somebody who's walking through something like this.
That's a great idea, babe. We do need to do that. Okay, so as we start thinking about what the Bible says about divorce, of course you have to start with, what does the Bible say about marriage? We actually talked about that a week ago on Marriage Monday, so I'll put a link to it right up here. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, just please go back to the last Marriage Monday episode a week ago and take a look at that. Today I want to hone in specifically on what teachings there are about adultery. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a ton of biblical passages that speak about adultery. I want to cut right to the one that I like to go to when we have couples ask us about this, and that is in Matthew 19, the beginning part of Matthew 19. This is Jesus talking, and he's going to be approached by a number of Pharisees, and they're going to try and catch him in a trap. And so we're going to take a look at what he teaches with regards to adultery and how do we apply that in our marriages. And adultery is such an emotional thing that it's really hard to think about anything except, okay, is this a biblical grounds for divorce? And I, as a champion for marriage, and we said this last week, our position is that divorce is never God's best for your life. Never. So, spoiler for this episode, we're not going to say that if your spouse commits adultery against you, you should get a divorce.
Yeah, in fact,
we're not going to say that.
We've never said that to anybody, and we've seen some pretty crazy things, and we never would say that to anybody, because that's something that only the Lord should speak over somebody, we believe.
That's right.
That you should, if you're getting a divorce, you should only be hearing that from the Lord.
That's right. And
we also believe the Lord would never tell you.
Yeah, we feel pretty good about saying that, because looking at what the Bible says, we don't believe there's a situation where the Lord would tell you to get a divorce.
But we would never encourage somebody to get a divorce. We would always say, you need to hear from the Lord.
That's right. But now, before you run for the hills, I will grant you that the Bible does teach that in the case of adultery, if you choose to get a divorce and remarry, that remarriage is not considered adultery. That's allowable. But there's a vast canyon between allowable and God's best for your life. And so let's take a look at what Jesus says here. Again, in Matthew 19, love to have you follow along with us. Matthew 19, chapter 19, verse 1 starts with, "Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, 'Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?'" Read that as, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for just anything?"
Irreconcilable differences, for example.
Yes. Jesus answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." That's a direct quote of Genesis 1 in the part of have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female?
Yeah,
and then Genesis 2 for the part about a man leaving his father and mother being joined to his wife, and what God has joined together, let not man separate. Jesus is quoting Genesis in that portion. Then the Pharisees said to him, verse 7, then the Pharisees said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. So we need to take a step back and look at this verse. There's a lot that we can learn about Jesus, about God, about the way Satan works through the Pharisees in this case. But let me give you a little idea of what was going on at the time. So there were two different schools of thinking with regards to divorce. There was a specific Pharisee who was teaching that the wife's job, because again, the only one who had the option of divorce at this time
was a Pharisee or a rabbi?
Was the man. Sorry, it was a rabbi. Yes, thank you. Was the man. So this rabbi, thank you, was teaching that you could get a divorce for any reason that you wanted, even up to if your wife just displeased you by, his example was by burning your soup. So she makes lunch for you and she doesn't do a good job, that's just grounds for divorce. Crazy. That was his school of thought. There was another rabbi who was saying, well, no, you can't get divorced for any like there has to be a threshold. And so this was the position that the Pharisees were cleverly putting Jesus in, is if Jesus, you can guess which rabbi was more popular, right? The rabbi who was telling these guys, yeah, you just, she doesn't make you happy, ditch her. Find a newer model. That rabbi was pretty popular at the time. So the Pharisees were putting Jesus in this position of either going along with the popular opinion and saying, oh yeah, you can divorce your wife for whatever reason, and therefore violating the law in Deuteronomy, which we'll get to in a second, which would of course make him not God, or he would stand by what the law said and therefore make himself less popular with these group of people that followed this rabbi. And Jesus, in perfect Jesus manner, takes neither of those options, right? Instead, as he did so often, rather than answer their question about can a man just divorce his wife for any cause, he asks them a question. And the question he asks them redirects their focus back to the Bible, which is what they wanted, right? They wanted him focused on the Mosaic law, but he went back even earlier than that. Mm-hmm. And what he said is, quoting Genesis, therefore man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. And the Pharisees in that moment went, oh crap. Well, but that's before the Mosaic law. So that would actually make both of these rabbis wrong.
Right.
Because they're focused on the Mosaic law, as Jews at the time were. And Jesus, understanding that the purpose of the Mosaic law was just simply to reflect the heart of an almighty, all-righteous God, Jesus directs them back to when God created marriage in the first place. And so the Pharisees, not really knowing what to do, just asked the question they wanted him to answer directly. Right?
Well, Jesus doesn't ever answer questions directly.
That's right. So they have to try and refocus him in on the quandary they were trying to put him in. And that's why they said to him, well, if that's what God said, well then, and listen to how they phrased this. Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? What's interesting is if you go back to Deuteronomy and take a look at Moses teaching on divorce, they're quoting him correctly. He does command the men to give a certificate of divorce and send them away, but they make it sound here like somehow the Mosaic law said, you know what you ought to do is just as a matter of course divorce your wife and send her away. And that's where Jesus' response to them is so important, because he says, well, it's because of the hardness of your heart that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. Mm-hmm. What's fascinating about this is the reason why divorce ever became a thing with the Israelite people is because men in the time of Moses were getting caught up in wanting to get a divorce from their wife, but because there was no mechanism in the Israelite culture for divorce, because from the beginning of Genesis it wasn't meant to have, there was meant to be no option for divorce, because of that, what these men were doing is just taking on a new wife, someone that they want to be with in the moment, but rather than divorcing their old wife, they just sort of shuffled her back. Right. Well, the problem is women at this point in society couldn't go get a job. She couldn't remarry someone who might love her the way God intended her to be loved, because she was married to some bozo who didn't want her around. And so this poor woman was just relegated to essentially a life of begging, because no man could get involved with her because that would be adultery. Her husband was having adultery. He just married the person that he was having the affair with, so that it wasn't technically an affair. So really, when God told Moses, hey, this is how you need to handle this, the problem is God was really in that moment frustrated with Moses and the Israelite people for not doing what they were directed to do. Because what that guy was doing, never, ever has the Lord consecrated polygamy or endorsed polygamy.
Right.
But God did say in the Mosaic law, if you have an adultery and you are caught by two or more witnesses, then the people committing the adultery are stoned, killed, dead. That's why we didn't have to worry about a divorce for adultery, because in Jewish culture, and according to God's law to Moses, a decade ago, if I would have been caught in my affair by two or more witnesses, which there was evidence of it that was seen by two or more witnesses, the proper response to that was, I get stoned. So
in that circumstance, I'm free to
That's right,
remarry.
because your husband's dead.
Right.
Right? So when we look at this, we have to recognize that the only reason that God even gave Moses a mechanism for divorce, and what does Jesus say here? It was because of the hardness of your heart that Moses allowed you to divorce. What he's saying here is because you weren't following the law I gave you in the beginning. Mm-hmm. You were letting guys go marry other women, not calling it an affair because they technically married the woman, and not stoning him. So because you won't do the things I've asked you to do, now I need to provide another avenue by which you can stop taking advantage of the most vulnerable among you. This whole passage here is really a reflection of God's heart and love towards women. If I have to hear one more person talk about how restrictive and horrible God's treatment of women in the Old Testament is, I'm going to freak. Because most of the Old Testament laws, when you read them in context, are nothing if not pro-women. Because at this time, in every other culture except Jewish culture, guys could literally do whatever they wanted with women. Insert your imagination here, and then send them off, never to be heard from or seen again, or kill them, or worse, because they feel like it, and I'm a man and you're a woman. And God was going to have none of it. And so when He saw this going on in the Jewish people around Moses. He conceded to the hardness of the hearts of the Israelites because he loved the women who were being taken advantage of. And he said, if you're not going to do what I asked you to do, then I'm going to provide this mechanism by which these women can be given a clean break from the marriage, and then some other man who will love them according to my commands can rightfully marry them because they're no longer another man's wife.
Right.
Fast forward to Jesus, but what does Jesus say? What's the second half of that portion? In verse 8 it says, he said to them, because of your hardness of hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but, and this is a massive but, but from the beginning, it was not so. Go back to Genesis 2 and try and find what the termination clause for a marriage was. You won't find it.
Right. It was just, you be joined to your wife and you are one flesh.
That's right. And he even quotes it here just to make it clear, right? Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore God has joined together, let not man separate it. So who's the only one that can separate it then?
God.
And how does God do that?
Death.
Right. That's it. I mean, that's what Jesus is saying.
Right, because we know that God is the giver of life and the taker of life.
That's right. So what Jesus is telling these Pharisees is, you know what? Both those rabbis are wrong. Mm-hmm. There isn't actually from the beginning any clause for divorce. Well, man, and if you're watching this right now and you have recently or ever gone through, I mean, you can see from Andrea how raw that her emotions were earlier, even now, a decade later. And it probably will be a decade from now, and forever, because you can't undo that kind of betrayal fully. But if you're watching this and you're going, man, wait, so you're telling, I mean, I've caught my husband in 4, 5, 6, 8 affairs, and you're telling me that Jesus said from the beginning there was never to be a divorce, even through the sting of adultery. When we look biblically at what it says in Matthew 19, and you can look in Mark as well, there's a similar discussion, a relay of this story in Mark. The answer to that is yes. There is not, God's design for marriage, even after an adultery, is that there would be no divorce for that couple. And when we think about what marriage is meant to be, that makes sense.
I was just going to say, and why is that? Well, because marriage is supposed to be a reflection of God's relationship with his bride, the church,
That's right.
which is us.
That's right.
So the example of that is there's never a separation. Once that union happens, once there's salvation,
and we're united to God.
And we're united to God, there's never a separation. There's never a, quote, divorce. He will never leave us, never forsake us. There is no going back on that.
That's right.
And so marriage is supposed to be a reflection of that relationship. And so that's why from the beginning it wasn't so, because that can't happen in God's economy. You know?
That's right.
It just, that isn't something that happens.
Yeah, and if you're going, man, I don't even, that just seems so difficult, I want to tell you you're not alone, because here's what the very next verse says after Jesus said that. The disciples said, so Jesus says, he says, but from the beginning it was not so. Then in verse 9, Jesus says, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, that's what he was just talking about earlier, and marries another, commits adultery. Right? Because remember, Jesus is referencing Deuteronomy and the Mosaic Law. And as we just explained to you, the reason for his concession for divorce with Moses was because men were committing sexual immorality. They were having sex with other women. You can call it your wife or whatever you want to call it. That doesn't make it so, right? I mean, I can call Andrea a blonde. It doesn't make her a blonde, right? You can call another woman other than the wife of your youth is what the Bible calls it, your first wife. You can call somebody else your wife. That doesn't make her your wife. And that's what was happening. It was sexual immorality. That's what was happening in early Israel under Moses. And that's why Jesus references it here. Mm-hmm. Because what he's saying is, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. What Jesus is saying here is, God told Moses that he would allow for this circumstances. He did it because he was watching out for these wives that were being taken advantage of. But Jesus is saying God's made this concession to Moses. He's going to uphold that because he made that concession way back then to Moses. He's going to continue it now. But again, see earlier when I said from the beginning it was not so. If you think this is difficult, you're not alone. Because the disciples, in the very next verse, verse 10, come to Jesus and say, the disciples said to him, if this is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry. I mean, this was such a earth-shattering revelation to the disciples, who were men, that probably at one level or another had bought into this. Well, what did God tell Moses? Well, God told Moses, what you need to do is, hey, you can go get with somebody else if you want. You just have to give her a writ of divorce and send her away. Then once you do that, then you can go be with somebody else. I mean, that was what was being taught. Not, and which is a complete misunderstanding of what marriage was designed to be.
Of course.
But so the disciples, realizing this, the wheels are turning in their head and they go, well, I don't think I could ever do that. I mean, you're talking about I have to eat burned soup and like it. I mean, if that's what I have to do, then it'd be better to just not get married. I mean, that to me, that is a validation of what you might be feeling right now, which is that, can this really be what the Lord's calling us to? Because I can't imagine continuing in a marriage with someone that has hurt me as badly as I'm hurting right now.
Yes, you probably can't imagine that.
No, that's right.
And
neither could they.
But with as raw as you saw my emotions even after 10 years, I don't live in that every day. And Nathan is not the person that he was 10 years ago. Praise the Lord. So, sure, there's things that still hurt. Not really that much anymore, to be honest with you. I can remember the pain that I went through, and that's painful to remember that, but that, I wish it could have been a different way, but that was the best thing for our marriage. I never would wish that on our marriage.
No.
Or on anybody. But it ended up being the catalyst for God to really... It ended up being the catalyst for us to allow God to do the work that he had wanted to do without not even just the affair, but just the way where we both were at that time and in our marriage. And Nathan has a lot of hurts too from me, so that I wasn't, like the perfect wife either, or I had a lot of my own issues and sin, and so yeah, there are still things that I think of, and it hurts and it brings tears to my eyes, but a lot of it is just thinking of the past. But God has used that in crazy amazing ways, and I can be thankful that he used it, and that we are not in that place anymore. Had that not happened, I'm not sure that we would still be married, because I think we weren't being faithful to the Lord, and I don't know that we would have been faithful to our marriage. Just in the fact of staying married. You know, I don't know that we would have been faithful to our vow to the Lord to stay married.
Right.
So you just don't know what God can do. And that was something that kept playing over in my mind when we were in the depths of it 10 years ago was, I don't know what God can do. And if I divorce him, I'm giving up on that.
Yeah.
And there's always hope. I have my whole life to hope for God to turn this around.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're listening to this, as we bring this to a close, this would be my challenge to you. Think about in your marriage, and this is if you're going through the thick of this right now, or if your marriage is great and you're listening to this. Ask yourself, who do you want to define your marriage? That's really what Jesus was asking these Pharisees, is who are you going to let define your marriage? Are you going to let these two rabbis who have opinions on it define your marriage, or are you going to have a marriage as it was from the beginning? I would pray that each and every one of us would desire to have a marriage as it was from the beginning. Because that's the marriage that brings glory and honor to the Lord. But that doesn't mean it's easy. And if there's adultery in your marriage currently, I would encourage you, God's desire is that you would have a marriage as it was from the beginning, where you're in your marriage, there's no thought of anything else, even in this difficult time. And so the only option you have is to, 1, cling to the Lord, 2, pursue your spouse, and 3, bring others around you who will help you with 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Because God's desire is that when we come together before him in marriage, that's it. We are all in between us and the Lord, even if our spouse doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. And when that happens, and I'm sorry if you're going through that and it has happened, the Lord, the grace and provision of the Lord is enough. And cling to him. If you have questions about how to get through this, I mean, you've seen Andrea's emotion here. She would love the opportunity to, if nothing else, pray alongside you, but answer any questions that you have, or just be there as a resource. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can email us at marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com, or you can comment to this video if you're watching it on YouTube, or you can comment on our Facebook page at Marriage by Design Podcast on Facebook. But please, 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 there are people around you that love you even if they've not met you, because we love God's design for marriage, and his plan is good, even when it doesn't seem like it is.
Yep.
So with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us. Pray into you guys this week that we would all be focused on having a marriage as it was from the beginning. Guys, until next time, thank you so much for joining us. We will be talking next week on Marriage Monday about divorce with regards to abandonment. And what does the Bible say about abandonment?
Great.
If you have gone through a divorce and you're wondering about remarriage, we will do that 2 weeks from today. We will talk about that. So please set a reminder in your calendar to check us out then. Guys, until next time, thanks for joining us. And remember, God is for your marriage.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.